Hey everybody, Tekking here, and today we are discussing the main character of the manga series of Bleach, Ichigo Kurosaki. That's right, we finally got to this point. Now, obviously, as the main character, this guy has done a lot of stuff over the past, 600 plus chapters. So, to sum up Ichigo Kurosaki in one word, I would say... fuck. Alright, well, first off, I guess I should say that this video is going to be structured a little bit differently than the other character discussions were. With the other discussions, I basically told you about the character and my personal opinion, and then I, progressively went through each arc of the series. With Orihime, I'm like, okay, what was her character like in the Substitute arc, Soul Society, Hueco Mundo? Which arcs had she more of a prominent role? Which arcs didn't she? Where did her character start to skew down the hill? But with Ichigo, it's different. He's the main character of the series, so it would be, just obvious to think that throughout the entire series, he should have a very prominent role. It doesn't matter what arc we're in, unless we're maybe talking about something like a side story or like the Turn Back the Pendulum. Obviously, he's not going to be the focus there, or other flashbacks. But when it comes to the present timeline in the main series, whatever arc we're in, he should maintain. Laughing right now because if you look at the Thousand Year Blood War arc, the current arc of Bleach, Ichigo really hasn't appeared through much of it and hasn't really done a lot of things. Now, he has done stuff. Gaining a whole new Zanpakuto, that was a big deal. Whole backstory involving, that really more focused on Isshin and Masaki's relationship, but it was a good thing for Ichigo's character as well. But, in terms of the grand scheme, final arc, main character, shonen battle manga, you'd think you'd be shown off a lot more. In fact, in the end, if we're talking just strictly about fighting, which that's not a whole character's point, is just fighting in battles, but in this last arc, Ichigo's only had 2 serious battles, and both of those were interrupted, and so we didn't really get a look at, totally of him being completely serious. In that regard, it's kind of easy just to laugh at Ichigo right now and be like, is he even in this series anymore, But just disregard that for a moment. Let's not talk about where we are right now. Let's talk about Ichigo's character. Alright, and I think something that I need to bring up before we even get into really the meat of it is how he compares to other shonen protagonists, because I hear this a lot. I hear Ichigo being compared to, let's just use for the sake of this video, there's a shit ton more, but let's just use for simplicity's sake, Naruto from Naruto and Luffy from One Piece, because these three originally, Naruto finished, but they used to make up the big O, is obviously the one that is the worst when compared to Luffy and Naruto. Now, let me just say one thing. There are major, crucial differences between Luffy and Naruto and Ichigo. Luffy and Naruto have a lot more in common as opposed to Ichigo, and I'm just going to explain why. So, when we have One Piece and Naruto, as for the series, as for the universe, those universes are a fantasy element. They take place in a different reality, alright? So, just right away, that's kind of a big deal, because while Bleach does incorporate different universes like the Soul Society and Hueco Mundo, when it comes to talking about the human world, the place that Ichigo was born and raised and lived his entire life at, up until he met Rukia, that is our Earth, as we currently know it. That's what Kubo was going for here. So, when you look at it just from that area, growing up in a completely different reality, it's going to kind of eschew your character. For example, in Naruto, it's more normal for 12-year-olds to learn how to shoot fire and head off into a world full of people that want to kill them. Not really so much the norm in our reality if you grow up as a typical teenager in a Japanese city. What's more prominent is that Luffy and Naruto, throughout the entire series, from the very beginning, have a definitive goal, a definitive endpoint that they have to get to, and that's the thing that drives them throughout the entire series, For Luffy, he wants to find One Piece. For Naruto, at the beginning of the series, he wanted to become Hokage because he does not have a definitive goal. But it's not necessarily a bad thing that Ichigo doesn't have a prime motivation or goal. Ichigo's certainly not striving to become, the strongest Shinigami that ever lived, or I'm going to become the Captain Commander, or I want to gain a spot on the Zero Squad. Ichigo's not trying to do any of that. seriously, that's what his character was established to be. Growing up in a normal environment, going to school, getting good grades. The only difference, the only paranormal aspect was that he could see spirits. But even Ichigo didn't really look at that like something that really made him vastly unique or vastly different. He just kind of lived his life normally just by, you know, he would encounter ghosts and he would just treat that as just a normal occurrence in his life. But then you have the game changer. You have Rukia arriving, and then you had that whole issue with, hey, you need to take my powers. It's the only way you're going to save your sister, who's being attacked by a hollow, who Rukia wasn't able to defeat, which I'm still kind of pissed off. Like, seriously, how did she not be... Okay, whatever. It's what kickstarted the series, so I'm not going to complain. But... so you had that issue there. You had Ichigo being presented with a dilemma. Pretty much his only choice here was either to let his sister die or accept this power, which he didn't even know even the slightest modicum of what he was getting into. He just met Rukia that same fucking day. And now he's like, you have to take my powers. It's the only way you can save your sister. And Ichigo's like, well, I can't let her die, so I'm just gonna have to, okay, give me the sword, Soul Reaper. Boom. And then he, you know, becomes a Shinigami without even really knowing the full ramifications of what that even means. And then he manages to save his sister. Now, that alone is not something you can really fault Ichigo for. Like, oh, well, if he didn't want the powers, he shouldn't have taken them. That's the only fucking option at that point. The big deal is, and this was also a main point of Ichigo's character, was what happened next when it was discovered that Ichigo was going to stay a Shinigami, that Rukia just could not take her powers back. And then we had that scene with Rukia kind of, it was with Hexapodus, when, you know, Hexapodus, that hollow, was chasing that kid around, and Rukia was basically saying, hey, look, this is the situation now, you basically have to do this. You have to become a substitute Shinigami. Ichigo, for being only a 15-year-old kid, accepted it. He accepted this responsibility at that young of an age. And that's kind of something I have to, you know, just point out from... He deals with situations much more maturely and much more differently than I would imagine most 17-year-old kids would deal with them at the time. Now, that doesn't mean that that's impossible, that, you know, a kid like that could exist. I'm sure there's many people that are that young and still have a pretty good grasp on reality and understand, like, okay, well, this is the only way it is. It's my responsibility. I'm going to accept this, and I'm going to perform my duties. That's just the way it is. I'm just saying it's very few and far between to see someone that young accept all that responsibility. But Ichigo did it. He understood what he was getting into, and he followed through with it. And he helped Rukia, you know, rid the town of hollows, okay? Now, this moves on to another main point of his character that I think a lot of people would bring up. In fact, I asked this question on my fan page, you know, to basically just define what makes Ichigo a good main character, or is Ichigo a good main character? A lot of people brought up the aspect of him is he wants to protect his friends, and that's his motivation. That's his main drive. That is the closest thing you're going to get to Luffy's One Piece, essentially. Now, people brought this up in both a positive and a negative way, that, you know, that's his main drive, and he stated this countless times throughout the series, you know, my goal is just to protect my friends. I don't really care about what you think it is. That's what I'm here to do. And for the earlier parts of the series, that is true. Ichigo, you know, he goes to the Soul Society. Why? To rescue Rukia, because Rukia did some great things for him, and he kind of owed her a debt of gratitude. That's basically what he said. You know, I'm here to kind of repay my debt to her. That's why I'm going to save her. That's why I'm going to, you know, make sure she doesn't get executed. And also, you know, the whole issue with Aizen revealing himself as the main antagonist. But keep in mind, that's not really a problem. Ichigo was his friend. Alright, he, you know, okay, well, there's this Aizen dude, and he kind of, like, fucked you guys all over and played you for saps, and now he's trying to take over the world. How is that my problem? You know, like, okay, I mean, like, whatever. And the only reason Ichigo got involved with the whole fight with Aizen is because he went to Wakamundo to save Orihime. You know, I kind of wonder what Ichigo would have said to Yamamoto, because Yamamoto did ask him at one point, like, we are going to need your powers for the upcoming war. Keep in mind, though, this was already after Orihime was abducted. I really want to see what would have happened if Orihime was never abducted, and what Ichigo's immediate response would have been to Yamamoto. He's like, we need your help for the war. Because I highly doubt Ichigo would have just, you know, picked up Zangetsu and just been like, okay, let's fucking do this. Because that's not really something he needs to get involved in. He just kind of had this pushed onto him, you know? And it's like, you know, I'm not like you guys. I'm not like you Shinigami, all right? I have my own life here in human world, you know? And that's something that is majorly conflicting with the whole Shinigami aspect. Now, I'm not saying Ichigo would not have agreed to help the Shinigami to fight against Aizen had Orihime not have been kidnapped. but I'm just simply saying that he should have not have said, it shouldn't have been an immediate yes. I think Kubo, if he did say, oh, like, am I just, you know, the Soul Society's puppet that I just have to go and fight whatever battle they tell me to fight? I should be able to do whatever I want with my own life. You know, and this gets kind of brought up with Ginjo in the Fullbringer arc. You know, Ginjo was a substitute Shinigami before Ichigo, and it was never really touched upon, you know, what he viewed the whole thing as. I mean, there was obviously some friction there, but it was never really touched upon, you know, why Ginjo left the Seireitei. I mean, why he left or stopped being a substitute Shinigami, stopped following orders. But I would assume it's probably because he's like, you know what, is Ichigo just at the whim of the Soul Society, or does he, you know, want to have his own life? I mean, I understand that in a lot of manga, the main characters, especially with shonen, because that's kind of the whole point, the main characters are always young adults. You know, always, like, usually between the ages of, like, 12 and, like, 18. And that's, like, your main shonen protagonist. And a lot of other mangas do this. But not all of them have have a character growing up in our reality. So you have to maybe think about it like, oh, I'm in high school, I'm going to go to college, and I'm going to, you know, get a degree in this whatever field, and I'm going to start a family, and I just want to live a life. And then, you know, this shit comes along, and it's just like, oh, I'm getting involved with, you know, extra-dimensional politics and shit like that, you know? And you have to really kind of feel for Ichigo in that regard. Like, a lot of the turmoil that's probably going around, and I really don't think Kubo is really grasping that very well. A lot of times, it's just like, you know, it's my duty to do this, so I'm gonna do this, which that doesn't really work all the time. You can't really use that. Like, Ichigo's just, you know, that basically does look like he's just blindly following, you know, whatever the Shinigami want him to do, you know. And in this regard, you have Uryu, who's also because he wants to help out Uryu. And also, I mean, this is kind of the bigger fight than we've ever had before. This is like the whole universe. But I'm just saying there should be a little bit more turmoil on where Ichigo's life is heading, you know. He should be a little bit more, concerned about these sort of things, you know. So would I say Ichigo is a good main character, I guess is the bottom line here. Yes, he is. But Kubo is his character a little bit more complex than it really is. And I think the prime way I can explain this, or give an example, is back during the Fullbringer arc, when Ginjo was relaying all this information to Ichigo about this combat pass, and what the Shinigami really want with him, and what happened to him personally. And it was this big build-up, you know, because that whole arc was basically like a massive mindfuck for Ichigo. I mean, it really was. And then you finally get Ichigo's response, which is the most cliche, you know, butter and bread, average, typical shonen hero response. And there's so much more to it than that. The intricacies of, you know, a 17-year-old kid dealing with all this shit, there's more intricacies than just, I'm gonna protect my friends. You know, and I don't think Kubo does very well to touch upon these aspects, or maybe he expects the fans to kind of just fill in the gaps themselves. But I certainly have seen shittier main characters than Ichigo. And I think the idea of comparing him to Naruto or Luffy, who are just honestly complete on that reality, as opposed to Ichigo. So, that's basically what I'm going to say. What do you guys think? What do you guys think about Ichigo? I'm going to ask the same question I asked on my fan page about, you know, do you think he's a good main character? If you do, or if you don't, why or why not? A bit more, maybe make the story a little bit more focus-centric on him. And keep in mind, I'm not even getting involved with the whole discussion about Ichigo's powers. Although there was one comment I did see which basically said, you know, it's funny that Kubo gave Ichigo, like, pretty much a remnant of every single power in the entire series, and yet he has so few techniques. He has two. He has Getsuga Tensho and Getsuga... and yes, he does have, like, shit like Sero, but he can't, you know, use that, you know, just whenever he can. And, I mean, now, I know, of course, Ichigo's going to get some main battles in the series, like, obviously, and it's pretty much set in stone. I mean, it has to happen. The main character has to defeat the main antagonist, especially in the final arc. You know, like, it's pretty much set in stone that he has to fight against Yuha Bak. Well, okay, maybe not technically Yuha Bak, because Kubo, you never know. Kubo could pull a fucking Shyamalan on us and be like, no, the final opponent is really Haschwalth, or Uryu, or Uehara, or Kon, or Ryunosuke. Yeah, remember that kid? That little bratty little Shinigami, or Rikichi's brother that showed up at the beginning of the Final Year Blood War arc, that appeared for like 3 chapters and then vanished. And then, mysteriously, after the Quincy's invade, he's never seen from since? Huh. Yeah, that's kind of of really convenient there. I think that's like a whole other discussion video, whether or not, you know, a whole about Ichigo's powers thing, you know, does he still have the hollow inside of him? You know, I think I might just do a separate one on that. But this one is just about his character, all right? Because, yeah, the powers aspect, that's a whole other fucking, you know, discussion. But, yeah, what do you guys basically think about Ichigo as a main character? That's what I'm getting across here. All right. Well, anyway, I'm going to go and read this, because this is probably like one of my favorite parts in the entire series. So, yeah, pretty cool. Pretty cool.